What's going on, folks? Welcome back to D-Life HD. This is Victor, and today we are going to be reviewing Monster Hunter Stories 2 for the Nintendo Switch. So without any further delay, let's jump right into it.
Switch it up. Switch it up. I was a worker, had to upgrade to a boss. Switch it up. Used to live in the hood, but had to upgrade to a loft. Switch it up.
Starting off, let's take a look at the game modes. Monster Hunter Stories 2 is, at its core, a JRPG, which means that the majority of the time you're playing in single-player mode. Now, the game does feature multiplayer functions. This is something that they've actually improved on compared to the original game, which was on 3DS. The original 3DS had the single-player mode, and it had the multiplayer mode, but there was no co-op. Most of the multiplayer was centered around doing two-person battles. So it was PvP, and it was kind of dependent on who had the best build, less so than strategy. You could scale the two opponents to the same level, but it always seemed like the person who had the better armor or weapons or monster in the game were going to do better. This PvP functionality is back in Monster Hunter Stories 2, but in addition, they have added co-op quests that you can play multiplayer, of course. You're running around the world and taking on these quests with two people. This is something that I really wished was in the first game, and it is honestly one of the coolest functions that has been added to the game. Co-op is something that is at the core of the base and original Monster Hunter games, and so seeing it in the Stories games is very, very cool. Moving right along, let's discuss the UI and graphics. The UI is actually extremely engaging in this game. It all sort of looks like a very rustic map, or like somebody's backpack opening up, that kind of thing. It's hard to put my finger on it, but it definitely feels like it exists in the world. Sometimes UIs can feel detached from the games. This is something that I really liked in Monster Hunter World, was that when you pull up your map, it would actually show an animation like you were physically pulling it out in the game. This is similar, where when you pull up your UI, it feels like you're flipping through notes, like your character is actually doing something. I really like this in the end game whenever you've completed a whenever you've completed a battle. There's a really cool end screen where you get to collect all your items and it shows you your rank, and it all looks so clean, and I'm very excited by it. In addition, the graphics in this game sport a more anime style. It's cel-shaded, it's cartoony, but it definitely lends itself to the style of game it's trying to do, because there aren't a lot of JRPGs that have these gritty, realistic graphics. Honestly, I really like the style. It's something that the first game did, but here with the second game, they've actually added a little bit more mature elements, in the sense that the player has grown up since the first game. We run into a few characters from the original stories, and they've gotten taller and they've become more mature. All of the monster designs are less chibi and more realistic, yet still keeping that cartoony art style that I really love. The graphics are great, but it does struggle from frame issues. This is something that the PC version of the game does not have, but unfortunately the Switch version runs into. I would have thought going with a less realistic style of graphics, they wouldn't be running into so many frame issues, but unfortunately it's the case. It has an uncapped frame rate, so sometimes you're getting 60 frames per second, and then other times in heavily populated areas like the villages or certain areas in the field, the frames really chug. It really subtracts from the experience, but I can say that I basically adjusted to it about 10 hours into the game. So if you're willing to push through those frame issues, the graphics are very stunning and the gameplay is great, which we're about to jump into. Alright, now let's discuss the controls and gameplay. Monster Hunter Stories 2 controls nothing like the normal Monster Hunter games because, as I said earlier, it is a turn-based RPG. Whereas in the normal games, you're going out and you're hunting monsters, it's very clunky in its style and sort of simulates what it would be like to go out and actually hunt these creatures. Whereas in this game, you're riding around on the monsters and encountering them and fighting them and then searching out their dens to find eggs which you can use to hatch more monsters to ride. The controls are pretty tight in this game. They're very similar to the original game's controls. One thing I do dislike about the game is, for some reason, the camera basically has like when you start moving it, it starts slow and then it speeds up. I hate this. I wish I could turn it off. And in addition, the player basically only has 2 running functions: walk and full throttle. I really like when you can ease into the acceleration of your character, but for some reason it feels really weird having me walk and then I move the stick just barely forward and then I'm sprinting across the whole area. I don't know. But it's really cool. The gameplay is amazing. One thing that I really like is how all the different monsters that you can capture, or I suppose hatch, all have unique functions that are realistic to the original games. For example, Nargacuga, who is more of a stealthy monster, can actually turn invisible and not be spotted by the enemies around. This is a really neat function that allows you to bypass certain enemies that you don't want to fight, but also it's true to the nature of Nargacuga in the game, where he's mostly trying to stay invisible using brush and such. There's actually a variant in the normal games called Lucent Nargacuga who can physically turn invisible, but this is more of like a camouflage function. And most of the monsters have their own individual functions like this. Like, for example, the Quechuacha, who is more of a monkey type monster, can climb up vines, and other monsters can't do that. Or Royal Ludrith can jump in the water and swim around, whereas other monsters cannot swim. It's very realistic to what the game does, and it honestly excites me to be able to hatch a new monster and then figure out what its function is. Like I said, the most of the gameplay is doing tasks for people and going out and killing monsters and then searching dens that are scattered throughout the open world. All these dens have monsters inside of them and then eggs that you will go hatch, and it's sort of a blind bag as to what monster you're going to get. Sometimes the nests where the eggs are guarded by other monsters, sometimes they're sleeping, so it's sort of up to whatever the circumstance is to how you're going to approach getting the egg. And sometimes you'll pull crappy eggs, sometimes you'll pull very rare eggs. It's honestly really, really exciting going into a den and then sort of seeing what you're going to get. Another cool function is that if you get a bunch of duplicate monsters, it's okay. They're not just going to be scrapped, because one thing you can do is channel the abilities of each monster into other monsters. So some monsters that you might already have 5 of will have different abilities, and then you can channel those better abilities into the ones that you've been leveling up or into other monsters. Like, for example, my Nargacuga that I referenced earlier, he's like my main guy right now, and I used a Basarius Fireball, channeled that ability into my Nargacuga, who is not a fire-breathing creature, but now he can breathe fire. So it's really awesome to be able to mix and match, and honestly, it adds so much depth. This was something that was in the first game, but they've sort of perfected it here. It adds so much depth to the grind, I guess, and doing extra questing that's not for the main story. Moving right along, let's discuss the music and sound. One thing that I have always loved about the Monster Hunter franchise, even the Stories games, is the music. The music is always amazing, because you're going to all these different locales and the music fits that style of locale. What do I mean by that? Well, you start off on a beachy island, and what type of music would you expect to be on a beach? More Hawaiian sounding music, with steel drums and steel guitars, that kind of thing. Well, that's the kind of music that we get on this island. The different regions are true to what we would actually have on Earth. And it's really cool. Like the more snowy area of this game has more bells incorporated, and maybe something that we might hear during Christmas time. I just love traveling to these different areas and then being excited by the music that's surrounded by it. Of course, the battle themes are on point. They create a sense of urgency and destruction amongst all the different music that's used in the story, which of course is very passionate in its style. Well, while at the same time you have characters like Naviru, who is a feline, creating sort of a happy nature to the game, and it gives it more of a comedic effect, I guess, and there's silly music during that time. I think the music is on point here, and I especially love the main theme of the game. It's the same main theme from the first game. Go and look it up. This rendition of it is fantastic, and I absolutely love it. As far as the sound goes, like sound effects, they're basically directly taken from normal Monster Hunter. And that's not a bad thing, because those sound effects are things that we have nostalgia for, and we have come to know and love. Alright, it's called Monster Hunter Stories, so let's talk about the actual story. Without giving away too much, because I want you guys to go and play this game, Monster Hunter Stories features sort of a destructive and almost scary story, honestly, because what you're doing is it's the story of a rider coming of age and also befriending a special Rathalos that has these destructive wings. The Wings of Ruin, which is the subtitle for Monster Hunter Stories 2. Basically, the guild, all of the normal hunters are basically seen as the bad guys in this game because they want to take away the egg from you that could hatch this Rathalos. Also, all of these monsters are acting up. This is sort of a cliche at this point for the games, but there are these giant pits that are opening up all throughout the world, and you'll see them all throughout all the different regions that you travel to. And they create these giant rays of light and beams that shoot up, and it causes the monsters to basically just go sicko. And so they're fully enhanced, they're way more powerful, and they are less predictable because they're in this crazy trance. So all of these rifts are appearing everywhere. You've got this Rathalos egg that could potentially destroy the world, but you're not going to dispose of it because you have a good heart. And then all of a sudden, all these monsters are sort of leaving their normal environments and scattering throughout the world. So what's happening? Why are all these events sort of stringed together? Well, you're going to have to play the game and find out for yourself, because it's a great story and I don't want to spoil it for you. Alright, now it's time for the final rating. Monster Hunter Stories 2 doesn't have the greatest story of all time. I think the first game's story is a lot better, but it's still engaging and it has lovable characters that I think you will enjoy encountering. Also, there is some bad frame drops in the game that really detract from the experience. The combat is amazing, even better than the first game's. They took what the first game did right and innovated on it to a degree that I absolutely love. Overall, I really like the game, and I will highly recommend it to any Monster Hunter fan and any fan of JRPGs. Alright guys, thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments down below what you thought of this video. We love talking to you guys. Remember to like and subscribe for more videos like these. Lastly, check out our Twitter account for gameplay of the latest releases. But most importantly of all, remember to always stay 1-up.